In today's lesson, toda kuita decanting, todatarisa ma-advantages and disadvantages. We want to look at the advantages and disadvantages of decanting, obviously starting with advantages. So what do you think are the advantages of decanting? Before ma-tarisa this lesson, my advice would be mombo pause and try to think about this question. What do you think are the advantages or disadvantages, cannot advantages and disadvantages of decanting? Now let us have a brief revision of what decanting is. We learned that decanting is a method of separation, kana kuti a separation technique, where we are separating a liquid from a solid. But the solid should have a certain physical property. The solid should be undissolved, kana kuti insoluble in that liquid. Saka, in food tenge tichiti decanting is a method of separating a liquid from a solid or two immixable solids by carefully pouring off the top liquid without disturbing the bottom layer. If you allow me, tinogona kuita double down on this definition. So we defined decanting as kutanga a separation technique. But if it is a separation technique, what are we going to be separating? Then what are we separating? We are separating a liquid and insoluble solid, because that's not pavene a solution, but it can be a soluble solid but isati yava dissolved in water. That's why pataka define takati insoluble solid or undissolved solid. We are also going to use this technique to separate two immixable liquids. And our typical example panapa is water and oil. What is the physical property we are going to exploit? The different densities of the two liquids. So in our first case, where we are separating a liquid and insoluble solid, the physical property we are going to be using is the insolubility of the solid. Kana kuti the inability of the solid to dissolve in the liquid. Therefore, we don't have a solution, we have a mixture. But when we look at our second case, where we are separating two immixable liquids, the physical property we are the most concerned with are the different densities of the liquids. Saka panapa, I can add a note. Kuti physical property, PP, panapa trukutarisachi insolubility. And the PP here, the physical property, it's different densities. And we know that we are going to be pouring away the liquid. But in our pouring, it's either tichashandisa tilting at a 45-degree angle, kana kuti tichashandisa chi separatory funnel. So this is just a rough summary. Separatory funnel, a rough summary of decanting. So if we understand decanting, we can then find kana kuti we can then quiz out advantages and disadvantages of the same decanting. So let us go to the advantages. What are going to be our advantages? Number one, the first advantage is it is a simple method. And the simplicity is felt in what way? Easy to carry out. And we can also say no complex apparatus used. chingatova complex separatory funnel, but it's a simple laboratory apparatus, so no complex apparatus used. Okay, but because this is a simple process, so it's going to be cost effective. Kana kuti the other word you can use panapa is inexpensive. Kana kuti tinogona kuva simple tongoti it's cheap. And what we can use to support this, no complex apparatus used again. Mapaona. No complex apparatus used. Number 3, our advantage togona good efficient for separating two immixable liquids or a solid end or a liquid rather and insoluble solid. Saka, we have taken this directly from the definition. It's efficient for separating two immixable liquids, water and oil. That's a famous example. Or a liquid and insoluble solid. Then for our number 4, tinogona kuti it's quick. And it's quick. Kana kuti saves time. That is also an advantage. Tinogona kushandisa futi panapa as an advantage kuti it is not labor intensive. Amunyanyi kusadharara kana muchiita this process. It's simple. It's also not labor intensive. And you don't use a lot of labor to carry out the process of decanting. It's also a practical process. Nekuti kana mvura yakatosangana nemafuta, even trikumba we decant. Tinongodira mafuta kunze tosara toti mafuta mvura. But efficiency should be questioned. That's why we have disadvantages. So we also say panapa we can tinogona kuti does not alter the chemical structure of the substances in the mixture. Take an example of two immixable liquids. Oil inoramba iri oil, mvura icharamba iri mvura. It does not alter, change the chemical structure of the substances in the mixture. Mvura icharamba iri H2O, dihydrogen oxide. Oil icharamba iri oil nema compounds ariko kuma oils. That's organic chemistry, carbon compounds. Mapaona. So this is just a rough summary of the advantages. I remind you again, this is not an exhaustive list. You can do your own further research and come up with other advantages of decanting. You can do further reading. And I'm also going to reiterate, a lesson is simply an ushering into a certain subject. It is your duty to do extra work to make sure that you have all the knowledge you are required to have. Let us now talk about disadvantages. Takuda kutaura pamusoro pema disadvantages. Saka ma-advantages enyu munofanirwa kugona kukombeya nekubatanidza certain advantages and disadvantages. Because a certain advantage can actually have a disadvantage. I'm going to give an example. Advantage number 3. Efficient for separating two immixable liquids or a liquid and insoluble solid. There is actually a disadvantage there. And how do we put it down? Tinongoti only works if the solid is insoluble. Saka kana solid iri soluble haishandi, oro the liquids are immixable, or the liquids are immixable. Itori disadvantage. Hatikwanisi kushandisa decanting kuseparate mvura nedrink because it's a solution. Does not work for a solution. You can say does not work for a solution. EOE, it's a disadvantage on its own, and Maonot we have linked it to advantage number 3. So you should have that skill. Mapona. Our number 2 disadvantage, not very accurate. Andika ndokunawedzera pana panchiti especially if the tilting method is used. Tikashandisa tilting method, accuracy yedu inenge iri reduced because pauno bendesa paya uchida kudira mafuta kuti abude mumvura, utori nezvimvura zvauchadirawo futi. Tikatoshandisa yedu, tokunoshandisa kutanga zvinhu zvinoita color, ndingati anonzi machi. You can do some research here. We color the water andika kuti tinyatsokuona a distinction in color between oil and water. Of course, water is the standard, is the baseline of colors. That's why it's colorless. Oil is goldish, yellowish. But difference yacho nogona kunetsa kuta notice. Kana chishandisa a transparent and a transparent separatory funnel. Saka tinogona kukala mvura. Andika toshandisa something chinoita make a solution with water, chopa mvura color, but it does not affect oil. Then patinozviisa in our separatory funnel, tonyatsokuona a distinction in color, a difference in color. Zvekuti patinovhura katape keseparatory funnel, mvura ichibuda tichicollecta in a beaker, tinozonyatsoona kuti kana color iyi kana kuti brown yapera, we stop the process. So it's not very accurate, especially if the tilting method is used. Kana kuti not very accurate for if some solid may be poured out with the liquid. Yes, togona kuti futi some solid can be poured out with the liquid. We can put it like this. Our other disadvantage is going to be it is not suitable for fine or little solids. Not suitable because if they are fine and little, it will be difficult. Like tora mavu chayo nemvura, it's difficult to use decanting to separate those. So not suitable for fine solids, fine or light solids. Tumasolids tukava tudiki, it becomes difficult. It becomes tons difficult. Okay? Saka tine process inonzi sedimentation. Mukaenda ku water treatment. Of course, water treatment is an application of filtration. Even though tichiona kuti sedimentation kana kuti kusetla kwemvura. Chera mvura mutsime, munomboirega yosetla. Tukunu tirimo tuenda pasi because tunenge turi more dense than water. That's why tichita sink to the bottom of the container. That is important. It's called sedimentation. So it becomes a disadvantage because it cannot be used when the solid does not settle. Because the solid inofange yasetla kuti tikwanise kushandisa decanting. Why is this so? Imagine this. We have cup yedu, we have our water, then tinenge tinechi solid yakasetla kunoku. Then todira mvura tichibuditsa. That's decanting. But kana solid ikazangana une mvura yacho yatiinayo, andika kuti this is our water and iyi ndiyo solid yacho irimo yakangosangana isingasettli. You cannot use this process of decanting. I hope it's making intuitive sense. Saka, that's a disadvantage there. For our number 5, incomplete separation compared to filtration. Saka atina edu kumboita comparisons processes aya, but you should know that this is what the examiner likes to do. We are going to be asked a lot to compare these separation techniques. Sometimes you are given a situation and asked which is the best and ideal separation technique to use. You should be able to answer those questions. Saka, in note taking and in learning, there are certain areas atisingagoni kuita venture into by reason of complexity uye nekusiyana-siyana kunoita ma-questions acho. But when you are studying, when you are watching these lessons, you should be able to compare filtration, decanting, evaporation, and compare them and see which is the best fit in certain situations. But kuti muzive kuti mofanga kushandisa which one in what situation, please understand that my physical properties are attached. Know kuti for decanting, we are separating two immixable liquids or an insoluble solid and a liquid. Know kuti for evaporation, we are separating a liquid and a soluble solid. Know kuti for filtration, we are also separating a liquid and an insoluble solid. Know kuti for magnetism, to separate a magnetic object from a non-magnetic object. Nzwisisai ma physical properties aya for winnowing to separate two substances of different densities. Kana tiri tadzokera decanting, tichida separate two immixable liquids, the physical property is they should be of different densities. Saka, you should know this. If you know these physical properties, then you can choose the technique of best fit per any situation. So this is what we wanted to learn today. If you want to join our school through my extra lessons and more, WhatsApp us on this number like this. If you are in Zimbabwe, you can just say 071 521 3310. Thank you and take care.